Welcome everyone. My name is Elliot Curley. I'm the manager of the Waste and Energy Assessment section, and just wanted to welcome you to the CER webinar, Source Separated Organic Waste Method. So I'd just like to start firstly by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands from which we're dialing in from today. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, and recognise any other people or families with connection to the lands of the ACT and region. We wish to respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. And we'd also like to acknowledge and welcome any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. So today there'll be three of us presenting. We've got Chantel Rebello, Tanveer Alam, and myself. So we're all part of the Waste and Energy team, and we're responsible for assessing applications under the method, and also assessing accrediting applications. They'll be ably supported by Glenn Stewart. So I'll just now start on the presentation to talk a bit about the ACCU scheme, and I guess speak a bit more about the method expiry and sunsetting, and what some of the implications are for that. So, as I said, today we're presenting the webinar on the source separated organic waste method, and during the method I'll abbreviate that to SSOW or SSOW, just to make things a bit easier. And also, as I said, the implications of the expiry of the method, which will occur on the 31st of March 2026. So the presentation will also help to provide potential participants to determine what is required to ensure their applications can be approved prior to the expiry date. So we'll discuss a general overview of the schemes that the CER administers to give a bit of context about what we do. But of course, the particular focus today will be on the SSOW method and the reason for the expiry date. The activities that you're permitted to undertake if you register a project under the method, and the application process and timeframes that you would need to take into consideration if you're going to register an SSOW project prior to the method expiry will also be a part of the presentation. So just starting off with what the Clean Energy Regulator does. So as you can see, we're fairly busy. So we're a government body responsible for accelerating the carbon abatement for Australia through the administration of 6 different schemes. So firstly, we've got the Australian Carbon Credit Unit scheme, which is the focus of this presentation, and we'll provide some more details about that as the presentation goes on. We also administer the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, which is the national framework for reporting and disseminating company information about greenhouse gas emissions, energy production, and energy consumption. There's also the Renewable Energy Target, which is working to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases in the electricity sector and encourage the additional generation of electricity from sustainable and renewable sources. Also, the safeguard mechanism, which is a component of the ENGA scheme, which I spoke of before. And the safeguard mechanism is the framework for Australia's largest emitters and is used to measure, report, and manage their emissions. So our newest scheme is the Guarantee of Origin, which just kicked off last Monday. And that's a voluntary scheme that tracks the emissions intensity of products like hydrogen and verifies renewable electricity. It supports the development of Australia's low emissions industries and our energy transformation. And then another recent scheme, which commenced earlier in the year, is the Nature Repair Market. So that's a voluntary national biodiversity market scheme, which encourages people and businesses to invest in products that restore and protect our natural environment. So now I'll get on a bit more in a bit more detail about what the ACCU scheme does, because the SSOW method is a, a, a method that sets out the rules for projects for organic waste projects within the ACCU scheme. So the ACCU scheme offers individuals and businesses the opportunity to run projects that reduce or sequester greenhouse gas emissions. So you can earn carbon credits for eligible reductions in emissions, and one carbon credit equals 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalents. ACCU scheme is a very broad scheme, so it ranges over a lot of different areas of the economy. So it looks at waste projects, agriculture, industrial emissions, energy efficiency, transport, and also vegetation projects. So now just moving on a little bit more to the mechanics of how the actual ACCU scheme itself works, and I guess the project life cycle that a SSOW project would go through. So the project really starts before you apply, and a project under the ACCU scheme has to have a project participant who's responsible for carrying out the project. And so the first component is really where the participant identifies an opportunity to develop a business model for a project that reduces emissions. If the potential project fits into one of the ACCU scheme methods, and the project, if it meets the requirements of the method, can be registered as an ACCU scheme project. So during the registration process, CER assesses the project registration application just to make sure that all the conditions of the method and also the overarching legislation, which is the Carbon Farming Initiative Act, are met in order for the project to be deemed an eligible project. So once the project's approved, it will have nominated a project start date in its application, and that's the date the project commences and can generate credits from. And from that, and so once the project's been registered, it's the responsibility of the project participant to deliver the activity that's been approved as a part of the project. So another very important part of the scheme is project monitoring and reporting. So in order to claim Australian carbon credit units, which are essentially carbon credits, you'll need to monitor and then report on your project activity to the regulator, and those reports might also include independent audits at various points through the project life cycle. So once the reports are assessed, we issue ACCUs if they're eligible. And once the ACCUs have been issued, then the participant, I guess, has probably 3 things that they can do with those. So if you've got a contract with the government, you can sell those back to the government. You can also sell those ACCUs on the secondary market. So you can sell those to other entities who want to reduce their emissions, or you can also sell them to safeguard entities. So entities who are liable under the safeguard to reduce their emissions can purchase ACCUs. And thirdly, you can also choose to use those ACCUs to offset your own emissions. So now I'll just talk a little bit about sunsetting. And I guess this is part of the reason, the main reason we're having this webinar today is because the method's sunsetting on the 31st of March 2026. And so it will no longer be available to be used after that. And so we're wanting to make sure that people understand that and make sure that if people want to submit a project, they understand the timelines. So I'll just talk a little bit about why the method's expiring and why methods sunset. So Commonwealth legislative instruments expire after 10 years, or the common term used for that is sunsetting, which is basically an automatic expiry that prevents outdated rules from continuing indefinitely and encourages a periodic review and update of those laws. It also ensures that legislation remains consistent with current societal, economic and legal changes. There was a time up until the early 2000s when there was no such thing as sunsetting. What that effectively meant is that at that time, the government realised there were thousands of pieces of legislation which had no current purpose, and so the regime of sunsetting was put in place back then to sort of make sure there wasn't this kind of build-up of useless legislation, essentially, or legislation that had sort of run its purpose. So the sunsetting of legislative instrument can't be extended. The 10 years cannot be extended under any circumstances. But the responsible department can remake the legislative instrument. So it's not just an exercise in updating the dates or the terminology in the method, but it's a comprehensive review of its effectiveness and appropriateness. As you can imagine, many things change over a decade. So the Authorising Act can change, the development of new legislation can come along, technology changes, and also there can be changes in legal drafting standards which can need to be updated. And it's basically an active mechanism for good governance and ensuring that, that all current laws remain useful and of high quality. So the government has been conducting a review of whether to remake the SSOW method, and that is ongoing. So what happens when a method expires? What are the practical implications for projects or people applying for projects when a method expires? So importantly, new projects cannot be registered on the method after it's expired. So after the 31st of March 2026, no new projects can be registered. The method is no longer in force. Existing projects that had been registered before that date and who started their crediting periods before the method expired are not affected. So they'll continue for the duration of their crediting period. In the case of SSOW projects, the crediting period is 7 years, and that means essentially that's the period of time over which you're allowed to create carbon credits. Once the method's expired, though, existing projects can still continue to vary the project proponent, and they can continue to vary the conditions that might have been placed on their declaration. So importantly, so if an existing project requests a start date variation, so in the scheme you're able to vary your start date and other various changes of the project, the variation application must be finalised by the CER no later than the method expiry date, so the 31st of March 2026. Any new projects that are registered before that date, so any projects that we register between now and then, the latest they can set their crediting period start date is the 31st of March 2026. So look, I'll just now hand over to Tan, who's going to talk to us a bit more about the activities in the method, to give people some more detail about the kind of activities that it covers. Thanks, Tan.
Thank you, Elliot, for the wonderful introduction and discussion about the ACCU scheme and method expiry. Now I will discuss about the activities that are covered by the SSOW method. So the SSOW method involves diverting food and garden waste from landfills and separating it at the point of origin and processing it by composting, anaerobic digestion, or creating process-engineered fuel. This process prevents methane emissions by reducing organic waste in landfill and generates valuable resources like compost and biogas, turning waste into a revenue stream while supporting actions under the methods of Clean Energy Regulator. There are 4 types of activities that can be undertaken in this method: new, expansion, aggregated, and charity diversion. A new project is where the activity must involve eligible organic material being separated at the point of generation from a single waste stream and diverted from landfill and processed at a waste treatment facility or unit using eligible waste treatment technology. An expansion project refers to the scaling up of an existing waste management activity that diverts organic waste from landfill. This involves, for example, increasing the volume of organic waste being separated or treated, introducing new infrastructure processes such as adding composting facilities, anaerobic digester, or food donation system. Aggregated activities include the combination of multiple smaller initiatives located at different places. Charity diversion is the redirection of surplus food to registered charities. This food would have previously gone to the landfill. So this method identifies 4 waste diversion activities. These 4 activities on this slide apply to new, expansion, and aggregated projects only. A commercial food waste activity is organic waste from businesses such as supermarkets, restaurants, food processors, and hospitality venues. A municipal food waste activity is organic waste generated by households and public spaces managed by local councils. A municipal garden and park waste activity is the diversion of organic waste generated from gardens and public parks managed by local councils. A municipal food and garden park waste activity is a combined waste diversion activity that deals with organic waste stream from household and council managed public spaces, including both food waste and garden park vegetation. For each activity type, this method offers default waste composition values for different activities, which simplifies calculating abatement. To be eligible for this method, you must include eligible organic material with waste mix types such as food, textiles, garden and park, wood and wood waste, sludge, nappies, rubber, leather. Please note, paper and cardboard are not eligible material under this method. Under this method, a project activity must treat organic waste using eligible low-emission processes such as composting, anaerobic digestion, or process-engineered fuel. Alternatively, eligible organic material can be donated to a registered charity. Now, I will hand over to Chantel, who will speak about the information to be included in the application. Over to you, Chantel. Thank you.
Thanks, Tan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be speaking to you about the timeframes for submitting an application and the information to include in your application. The eligibility of a project includes several requirements. A project must be new, have the legal right to carry out the project and claim ACCUs, and not be part of any other government programs or have received government funding. The project also needs to meet the regulatory additionality requirement and the government program requirement. This means that the project cannot be required to be undertaken under any Commonwealth, state or territory laws, and the project cannot be undertaken as part of another government program or scheme. If regulatory approvals are required for the project, for example, building permits or licenses, these need to be obtained prior to the project registration. If they are not obtained, the regulator may choose to register the project on the condition that the required approvals are obtained before the end of the first reporting period. The following are examples of activities that cannot take place prior to the project registration. These include making a final investment decision in relation to the project. Examples include securing or allocating money for the project, acquiring or leasing a tangible asset for the purposes of the project, such as leasing treatment facilities or buying bins for the organic waste, and commencing construction work for the purposes of the project. This could include constructing treatment facilities. The following are examples of activities that can take place prior to the project registration. These include conducting feasibility studies, planning or designing the project, for example, identifying locations for treatment of the organic waste, obtaining regulatory approvals and consents, which includes development approvals or environmental licenses, and sampling to establish a baseline for the project, which could include trials on waste segregation or treatment, noting that any location in a trial would be excluded from the actual project. As presented here in this slide, there are two main elements to legal right: the right to conduct the activities and the right to claim ACCUs. Legal right ensures that the project proponent has the right to both element 1 and element 2. This means that the legal obligations relating to the project are assigned and sit with only that project proponent. Effectively, this also means that the ACCUs from each project are only provided to one project proponent. The CER reviews the legal right of the assessment during the assessment of the registration of the application. To do this, evidence is required that the legal right is there from the person who owns the waste and the waste treatment facilities. This can be provided in the form of draft contracts or excerpts from contracts, or letters that are clearly executed by all interested parties, granting or assigning legal right to the proponent. If the waste, treatment facility, or equipment that will be used in the project are owned by the proponent, then a statement to that fact is sufficient for demonstrating legal right. Particularly in the SSOW method, legal right for the waste and treatment facility must be determined at the time of registration. The legal right for the waste is originally held with the waste generator, and the legal right for the facility is held with the owner of the facility. If there is any intermediate locations where the waste is held during the process from its origin to the final treatment, it should be disclosed in detail in the project description to determine if legal right is or is not required. Projects registered under the SSOW method normally require a legal right document from not only the waste generator, for example, councils who own the curbside waste, but also a proposed existing treatment facility which may be owned by another entity, for example, the owner of the landfill where the treatment facility is located. I briefly touched on regulatory additionality earlier. To expand on this, regulatory additionality can be quite a significant factor for the waste sector. With more regulations and restrictions about how waste should be managed, it is important to understand how this may impact your eligibility to participate in the ACCU scheme. Regulatory requirements may be contained in several forms. For example, codes of practice that have a legislative effect, environmental approvals, development approvals, or local government requirements. Our view is that regulatory additionality will be met if the project activity goes beyond any existing legal requirement. In cases where the respective regulatory requirement refers to reducing or offsetting emissions but does not specify a particular activity to do so, we will consider the specific instructions of the regulatory requirement. The CER requires certain information to be included with the project application, which will assist with the application being registered without further information being requested from the applicant. This includes a detailed description of the activity, such as the origin and type of eligible organic material and the locations that the material will be transferred to, including the final location where the waste will be treated by the eligible treatment technology. Applications must also include any proposed and future activities, such as aggregation or expansion. Details of the treatment technology and at least one proposed facility must also be provided at the time of registration. Once a project is registered, the project may change or add new waste and treatment facilities. However, legal right would need to be determined for any changes. Section 16 of the SSOW method also outlines a requirement to provide at least 24 months of historic evidence that the waste that will be used for the project was previously going to landfill. And this evidence can be provided in the form of either weighbridge data or waste disposal invoices or contracts. I'll now move on to the timelines for submitting an application. This is of particular importance due to the expiry of the method on the 31st of March 2026, and this has implications for application submission as well as project start dates. The formal application process begins by submitting an application. However, we encourage you to engage with us prior to the submission and to engage with us early so that we can provide guidance and advice regarding any issues or matters that need to be addressed in the application. Often these early interactions prove extremely useful to prospective proponents, as it is also an opportunity for us to gain insights about the project before an application is submitted. Project registration applications must be submitted via the CER client portal, and the form takes you through a series of questions. You must also nominate a crediting period start date. This is the date in which your project can commence earning ACCUs. Due to the expiration date of the method, the start date must be prior to the 31st of March 2026. New participants must also pass the fit and proper person test. This is separate to the project registration process and can itself take up to 90 days. New participants must also register to create an ANRU account, which is where your ACCUs will be stored. This is also a separate process to the project registration. The project assessment team has 90 days to assess the registration application. However, it can be reset if further information is requested. This is another reason that those early engagements prior to submission is useful, so that we can provide advice about everything that needs to be included in the application. If the assessment team deems that the project is eligible under the scheme and can reasonably result in abatement under the selected method, the project would be declared as an eligible offsets project, and once it's declared, the project will start on its start date. If you wish to submit a new application, the CER would kindly request that you submit your application prior to the 15th of December 2025.
Thanks, Chantel. Thanks, Tan. Thank you, everyone, for coming along today. We really hope that this webinar, I guess, sparks people to submit some projects. If you have any questions of the regulator about anything, any projects, you know, my team is more than happy to talk. So please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. And look, I think we might leave it there. But again, look, thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.